Manga and Lovecraft. You're probably thinking of Junji Ito, aren't you? Well, recently there came to my attention the existence of another Japanese manga artist who absolutely deserves and eventually will have his name synonymous with the phrase manga and Lovecraft. Today we're looking at the manga H.P. Lovecraft's The Hound and Other Stories by Japanese manga artist GOU TANABE. Before we review the manga, I feel it is important to first read a note that Tanabe wrote in the back of the book. It goes like this: a sleepless night, a presence at the door, a whispering barely heard, an anxiety and fear such as you haven't felt since you were young, an intuition of primordial death. Lovecraft was a writer who crafted such unknowable darkness, a priest of his own mythos. I know fear even at the richness of his creativity. By illustrating his stories, I intend to become an apostle of the gods he made. I do not feel my work is yet complete. The images swell in my mind. If I draw it like this, if I do it this way. I hear the divine voice commanding me to continue. I am blessed that you are reading this. You have my gratitude. 2014, Hai-sama, GOU TANABE. Like Junji Ito, GOU TANABE is a true fan of Lovecraft who had a great respect for the man and the mythos. He clearly put his passion and devotion into this manga and didn't half-ass it for the sake of a paycheck or to cash in on the niche market that is Lovecraft, like Mr. Allen I had a huge tax bill to pay Moore did with his ridiculous Neonomicon. The book features 3 adaptations of Lovecraft's stories: The Hound, The Temple, and The Nameless City. I'd say that although these aren't the stories people first think of when they think of Lovecraft's stories, these were the right choices, being short in length and varied in characters, settings, and so on. As such, it was the right choice by Tanabe to show off some variety, though personally I would have loved to have seen Dagon being adapted instead of maybe The Hound. The book is 170 pages in length, so each story gets about 50 pages to tell its tale. I'm assuming you are all familiar with these 3 stories already, so I won't spend much time at all discussing the plot, so this video should be mostly spoiler free for those of you who are new to Lovecraft. Tanabe's adaptations take very few liberties and are pretty much verbatim from Lovecraft's stories. I actually went through and read the 3 Lovecraft stories again just to freshen up before doing this review, and yes, these adaptations are pretty damn accurate. Personally, I really like that. I guess there is an elephant in the room regarding Junji Ito and how GOU TANABE compares, since for a long time Junji Ito is the guy who comes up when you search for Lovecraft in Japan. Fair enough. Well, I'm not going to make this an Ito versus Tanabe video. Both are absolutely amazing artists and both are extremely respectful of the mythos, so to try to give one a rank above the other is insulting, and in all honesty I don't and can't favor one above the other. They really are just great artists, that's that. But to compare the two, well, firstly I must point out that Junji Ito obviously has the freedom to produce his own original stories, whereas Tanabe chose to do strict adaptations, so this must be kept in mind. Nonetheless, both artists are very capable in depicting the horror they wanted to. Ito is more stylized in his art style at times, whereas Tanabe is much more realistic in his art. Tanabe uses a lot more black in his art also, a lot of deep shadows, playing with light to set a tone, that sort of stuff. That's all I can really say on the matter of comparing those two, so let's move on and look at these 3 stories. First up is The Temple. I loved this story immediately because it featured great depictions of World War II German U-boats. I am absolutely a massive U-boat fan, so that started my impressions off very well. I should point out a couple of issues here. Lovecraft set his story in World War I, and Tanabe set the story in World War II. I don't know why, except maybe U-boats are more prominent and synonymous with World War II. The change really doesn't undermine the plot at all though. Secondly, I must be an autistic nerd here and say, actually, U-boats don't have portals from which the crew can look out of. They also do not have searchlights fixed for underwater exploration. This isn't a fault of Tanabe but of Lovecraft, if it's really a fault anyway. In the actual stories, these errors feature too, but I doubt Lovecraft included these technical inaccuracies through ignorance, but included these inaccuracies because they are important to the plot. And I do know for a fact that before Lovecraft wrote his stories, he did a lot of technical research usually. We'll just call it creative license and move on. Besides that, what else can I say? I think the story really works well because in the World Wars, submarines were already the most horrific place you could be. Besides the fact that in World War II, 3/4 of German submariners were killed in action, higher than any other branch of the German army, combat stress was massive and occasionally temporary madness did occur.
Zurück! Zurück, Johann. Zurück, Johann!
As such, it is pretty easy to use that sort of setting as a place where the crew can begin to go insane after a horrific discovery at sea. Great story. Second up is The Hound. This story is one of the comfiest stories by Lovecraft and arguably one of his stories least influenced by cosmic horror or existential horror. It can easily be read in the manner of a regular horror story and it still works. It features a lot of stereotypes of the era Lovecraft set it in. Gothic scenarios, grave robbing, being pursued by some horrific monsters, that sort of stuff. In fact, Lovecraft actually mentioned that this story was sort of a parody of his own writing, written in a floral, over-the-top type of manner, which still becomes a great thing to read. This story is also the first story which mentions the Necronomicon, and we see that horrific book in the story. One of the main characters, a guy called St. John, looks a bit like a stereotypical anime badass, always calm, smug, and slightly arrogant with long hair. But that's also how Lovecraft made his character, so yeah. The story features a lot of use of shadows and darkness, and the whole story has this terrible feeling of foreboding, which is perfect because that's basically what the characters were going through in the story. And the ending is typical stereotype of Lovecraft, and the way it's presented in the last scenes for the last character, wow. Finally, there is The Nameless City. This story, I would say, is one of the most underrated by Lovecraft. Nobody really mentions the story much, and it's really off the radar in the mythos community, I've noticed. Firstly, it's got one of Lovecraft's favorite adjectives in the title, nameless. Always uses that one. Secondly, it deals with one of the typical traits of a Lovecraft story, and what I consider to be almost vital to a Lovecraft story. Man going to places man should never have touched or interfered with. Visually, this might be the prettiest story to read. To look at? Yeah, you know what I mean. Some of the panels really are amazing to look at. For example, this one which sees the protagonist wandering through the dunes of the Nameless City, but by the way the dunes look, they could easily be waves, and it's quite unnerving. Further panels show the protagonist forced onto his hands and knees as he crawls through the narrow and confined corridors of the city. It's very claustrophobic. The story, I guess, is similar in style to The Statement of Randolph Carter, in that both feature a brave adventurer going down into a nameless and black cavern underground and finding something ancient and monstrous. Come to think of it, Lovecraft's ghost-written story Imprisoned with the Pharaohs is a bit like that too. Anyway, it's a great story and definitely underrated. In conclusion, this manga is a great presentation by GOU TANABE and shows why he must absolutely be seen as a person in the mythos community to take note of. The art style is crisp, clean, realistic, with even the smallest and inconsequential of panels showing just as much effort as the massive detailed panels. I really hope you like this video because GOU TANABE has another book out that was recently released. It is a 2-part adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness. The first part is out already and the second part comes out in late October, I believe. So far, I've read it at least 3 times and loved it, and without a single hesitation I can say so far this 2-part adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness is looking to be the best adaptation of any Lovecraft story ever in any format. No, I am not being hyperbolic here either. Part 2 will be released up pretty soon, and obviously I will be buying it as soon as possible and reading it, and when that one comes out and I've read it, I'll be making one big mega video review of that adaptation. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you want to buy this manga featured in this video, the link is in the video description below and you can pick it up for about $10 or $11 US including shipping.